Hello, this is Jeremy Logsdon at Jamf, and in Lesson 16, we'll be talking about iOS scope. First off, let's define the term scope. In relation to Jamf Pro, we can think of scope as the users, computers, and mobile devices that receive remote management tasks. Things like apps and configuration profiles to be deployed all require scope. If scope isn't configured, this is the equivalent of trying to send something through the mail without an address on the envelope. The post office wouldn't know where to deliver your mail, just like Jamf Pro wouldn't know where to send the remote management tasks. Scope can be configured using three things: targets, limitations, and exclusions. In this lesson, we'll be focusing on targets and exclusions. Targets are the initial pool of devices from which we can also exclude some devices. One example of a target would be all mobile devices. This pool would include every managed mobile device enrolled with Jamf Pro. Or we could target specific devices either by individual devices, device groups, building, or department. This begins to narrow down the pool of devices to receive a management task. After selecting targets, we can add exclusions to remove devices from that pool. Once targets and exclusions are selected, we are left with our final scope. Let's look at this another way. Here's a visual representation of devices in Jamf Pro. A target of all mobile devices would include all 4 managed devices. Or we can select specific devices by adding a target of Minneapolis. Now, only devices in the Minneapolis building would receive the management task. It's also possible to have multiple targets. Targeting the Amsterdam and Minneapolis buildings will result in devices in either one of those buildings to receive the management task. However, we can still add the option to exclude devices from that pool. Adding an exclusion for the accounting department will prevent any devices in that department from receiving the management task, regardless of if they are in a targeted building. So by targeting the Amsterdam and Minneapolis buildings and excluding the accounting department, we're left with our scope of Tango and Foxtrot. Bravo is in the targeted Minneapolis building, but it's excluded from scope because it's in the accounting department. Now that we understand scope, let's look at how to configure scope in Jamf Pro. Going to mobile devices and taking a look at configuration profiles, we can use the scope to determine which devices receive what settings. Currently, we can see there is no scope defined for these profiles, meaning these settings will not be applied to any devices. If we want to deploy Wi-Fi settings to devices in the Amsterdam building, we can select that profile, edit, click the Scope tab, and under Targets, take a look at the drop-down menu for Target Mobile Devices. The two options are All Mobile Devices or Specific Mobile Devices. Since we don't want this profile to go to every managed device, we can leave Specific Mobile Devices selected, because we'll be targeting devices specifically in the Amsterdam building. Then click the Add button, click Buildings, and add Amsterdam. Now that we have scope defined, click Save. Clicking Done will take us back to the list of configuration profiles, and now we can see the scope for Amsterdam Wi-Fi is the Amsterdam building. Similarly, if we want to deploy Wi-Fi to all devices in the US, we can add multiple targets. Click the US Wi-Fi profile, edit, and scope. Go ahead and click Add to specify deployment targets. Click the buildings, and add each building in the United States: Minneapolis, Eau Claire, New York, and Cupertino. Click Save, and then Done to take us back to all configuration profiles. Here we can see the US profile is now scoped to 4 buildings. Now let's deploy some restrictions. If we need to apply these restrictions on all mobile devices except for the IT department, we can do just that. View the restrictions profile, click Edit, and Scope. Here's a use case where we can select all mobile devices. Then click the Exclusions tab, add an exclusion, and select Departments. By adding an exclusion for the IT department, they will not receive these restrictions. Click Save, and then Done. Now we can see the scope for the restrictions profile is all mobile devices, with any devices in the information technology department being excluded. That's all for the lesson on iOS Scope. Be sure to check out the next lesson covering iOS groups. Thanks for watching.